Hello everyone, it's Ellen and today I have a new art journal video to share with you. So I'm working in my ring bound scrapbook. This is my new art journal. It's got lovely thick paper to work on and I'm backing the entire page with this piece from a vintage sewing pattern. I knew that I wanted this to be my base layer. I've been doing a project over on Instagram and TikTok where I post a tag every single day, and I've used these sewing patterns quite a lot as a base layer. I love the vintage look that you get from them. So I'm trying to make it as smooth as possible because I am going to be sticking some things on this. So that's why I'm going piece by piece, adding my matte gel medium, strip by strip behind it, then laying some of the paper down and moving along, and then covering the entire top of that with more matte gel medium, and I'm setting that aside to dry while I work on my main focus for this page. So I knew I wanted to create this giant rainbow and have each section of the rainbow using a different mixed media or a different vintage book paper as the base, or I just wanted each one to show different techniques. And to do that, I created, just using some card, I drew out the rainbow so that I knew I could get it in the right shape and get each of the sections the right size as well. So I'm starting with my red layer, and I've got this beautiful vintage paper from a piano book, I think it was, and I'm going to cover the entire page with this red poster paint. The reason I've used poster paint is I want to make sure that you can see all of those music notes through it. I don't want to cover them up. I just want the tone to be red. So I'm just using my spatula to cover the entire page with that first layer, and I'm going to dry that off. I've then got this really big stencil. I think this is kind of like a snake pattern, and I'm using my sponge dauber to just push through some darker red to create that pattern onto the page. Again, I'm using a poster paint because, like I said, I don't want to actually cover up the paper underneath. I just want it to be more red. With that leftover paint that was in my palette, I'm going to add some water and create some splatters all over this page. Once I've dried off all of the layers, I'm going to stick my sort of card guide that I created underneath, and I'm using the guide to make sure that I get the top curve perfect. The bottom curve doesn't matter so much because the next layer will be covering that up, but the top curve really needs to be the shape that I sort of mapped out with that card template earlier. So once I've glued that on and flattened it down, you can see I've cut out the top curve and the bottom doesn't really matter. I wanted to make sure it was a bit wider than the card guide that I created because I want there to be something for the next layer to sort of stick onto. I really wanted to add some black to each layer as well, not too much because I want you to be able to see the colour underneath. So to do that on this first layer, this red arc, I used a stamp with some black archival ink and I just lightly dotted that over the page. It's not very easy to see on camera, but in person it definitely adds a little pop of black to that page, so I'm really happy with that. Onto my orange layer, I wanted to create sort of my own backing paper for this. I didn't use a book paper or anything, so I've taken some heavy white card and added some clear gesso to it so that I can add lots of mixed media to it without it warping too much. I've dried that off and sprayed some water onto it, and then I've added some of my Paper Artsy infusions to it. So I've got an orange and a yellow colour, and I love these. But the thing that I didn't think about when I was creating this layer is that they are sort of grungy. They are intended to be more vintage rather than bright. So the colours that I use, this first layer, it's just not very orange because there's too much of that brown coming through. Now, as I added layers to it, unfortunately I missed a bit of that footage, but as I added layers to it, it did start to look a bit more orange, and I'm definitely happier with how it's looking here, but it's still not quite orange enough. When I put that red arc up against it, it just didn't look different enough for me. So I've now gone in with some watercolour onto my piece of plastic, and then I'm kind of smushing that onto the page over the top, and it just adds a bit of a brighter orange, and I'm just so much happier with how it looks. I've covered that in splatters from all the various colours that I've used, and once again I'm going to stick that guide onto the back of my mixed media, cut out that top arc so I know that's the perfect shape, and again I can leave the bottom. I started to work on the yellow strip here before remembering I didn't add any of the black to the orange, so I'm going to go back to the orange in a second, but I've got an old Alice in Wonderland book that I'm going to be using as backing for the yellow arc, so I'm just removing a page. I was trying to pick a page that didn't have illustrations on it because I like to use them for different things, so I've got a page here where it's all just text. I've then remembered that I've not put anything black on the orange arc, so I've gone through and found these rub-ons, and they're sort of black and grey, so I thought they'd be perfect, and I was happy to add something a bit something that took the focus a bit more off this page, because there isn't any vintage book paper in the background that I'm sort of conscious of covering up. So I'm going to pick out a few of these floral rub-ons and add them all over the page, all over the arc that I created, just in various areas, and again they're going to add that hint of black that I wanted. They obviously cover up the page, the orange, a bit more, but I'm kind of fine with that because I wasn't overly happy with that orange colour anyway, and when the rainbow's all together it creates a really cool effect, so I'm happy with that. So we're going to go back to the yellow section now. I've added some cream tissue paper messily. I've messily collaged this onto the top of my book paper. The reason I did that was more from a texture point of view. So when I was adding the sewing pattern to my base layout, I really tried to get it flat. When I was collaging this tissue paper onto this book page, I deliberately left sort of wrinkles in it. I wanted it to be quite textured. I've then coloured it with some yellow watercolour in various shades, and then I'm going over with some yellow poster paint through this funky stencil that I had, and I'm making sure that I've put them sort of in the arc pattern, and again, like I did with the red section, that leftover yellow paint that I've got in my palette, I've watered down, added lots of splatters, and I'm really happy with that. I'm drying in between each of these layers. I just tend to cut that out of the footage because it's not very interesting. I'm just holding a heat gun over it. You may have seen that my guide for the yellow section was different to the white ones. That's because I did an entire yellow section and hated how it looked. So this is my second attempt at the yellow section, and believe me, it's much better. The yellow section was not working with how I originally did it. I then got this really cool dot stencil, and I'm adding some black acrylic paint through the dot stencil as my pop of black on the yellow section. Love that, really happy with that. It's a lot more simpler than what I did before, and it's so much better. So if you ever do something and it's not quite right, don't be afraid to give it another go. You know, some things just don't work out, and that's okay. So we're moving on to the green section, and I knew I wanted to use one of these papers from this vintage atlas. This is really old paper. It's absolutely beautiful, and it takes a lot for me to use it because it's so stunning, and it's one of those things that once I've used it up, I know I'll be very sad. But I've gone for a page that has more green on it because that's the colour that we're working with. I've then used the same stencil that I used on the red section. I'm trying to tie in different stencils. Where I've got so many colours and mixed medias going on, I've tried to repeat stencils or stamps just so it doesn't get sort of too chaotic. In my head, that makes sense. So I used some green distress, some of my green Tim Holtz ink to pass through that stencil. I've then used that same ink to ink up a stamp set that I've already used, and I've added that to the atlas page as well. And then for the black layer, I just added some black splatters with some watered down acrylic paint. Again, I don't want to cover up too much of that vintage paper because it's so beautiful, and I've left it at that. I think as I was going through this process, I realised that where I'm doing so many of the rainbow arts and colours, that actually the mixed media that I want to do needs to be a bit more simplified. And once I kind of figured that out, I was on a roll. The first couple, the orange and the red and even the yellow, when I did the first arc of the yellow, I think I was trying to overcomplicate things, and I kind of realised that I'm already complicating things for myself because I'm doing the 7 colours and I'm trying to do 7 different mixed medias. I actually needed a system to simplify things a bit more, and once I worked that out, the process went a lot quicker. So I just talked all the way through the blue arc, but I added some collage blue pieces from different magazines that I had, and then I simply used an alphabet stencil and my Tim Holtz Distress ink in black soot, I think it's called, and passed that through the stencil. That one's done. Absolutely love how that looks. We're on to our final section now, the purple section. I've used a page from my Little Woman book. Again, one of my favourite book pages, so it's hard to use. I added lots and lots of clear gesso to this page because it's very brittle, which means it would just absolutely soak up any of that water that I put on it. So I made sure to add a really good strong layer of gesso to it before I started working on it. I've then used my Lindy's Gang mica powder in purple to sort of colour the page purple, and then I've used a really pretty floral stamp with my black archival ink, and that's to tie in the florals that I used on the orange section, and added some splatters from different purples, and that's that section done. Really happy with how the purple turned out. It's quite shimmery as well, and it's really pretty. So I've got all of my sections of the rainbow done, and I am going to start assembling the rainbow. So I've gone section by section, starting with the purple. I've inked around every edge with my Tim Holtz Distress ink in black soot, and then I am trimming out, as I'm gluing each section, I'm trimming it out so that it all becomes the right length. So a tip, if you do anything like this, is deliberately cut your sections longer and thicker than you need them to be. Like I kind of tried to explain earlier, the top arc of the rainbow is where it needs to be, but I then left some wiggle room on the rest of the arc so that I can glue it into place, so that I can mess with the shape a little bit more, so that I can get it perfect when I'm assembling it. I'm hoping that's making sense, and I hope that you can kind of see what I'm talking about here. I can sort of manipulate that arc a little bit so that I can use the section with the best mixed media, and really make sure that I'm perfectly happy with it. You know, you've put all of this effort into each of these pieces. You don't want to then glue them together and realise that it's a little bit short. So just cut things a little bit bigger and you'll save yourself a lot of time. I'm using tacky glue to attach each of these layers, and although this is strong, I'm going to then sew through them as well. There's a lot of layers to get through from this rainbow, and I just wanted to make sure it's secure. And also I love the effect of sewing. I've talked about it before. I use my sewing machine in my junk journal, in my art pages all the time, because it just adds a lovely texture. I love how it looks. So we're sticking down the red arc, and you can see here the finished rainbow, and I'm so pleased with it. This video may only be 16-17 minutes long. This was hours of filming. Obviously all of the drying is cut out of these videos. Some things I had to do twice because I weren't happy with it. I filmed this over 3 days. I wasn't solely filming this video for those 3 days, but it was a hell of a lot of work for a 17-minute video. So I really hope you'd like the finished effect as much as I do. Like, I'm really happy that I spent the time on this, because it looks how I envisioned it when I thought about this idea, but it was a lot of work. So I've added some clouds using some white gesso through a cloud stencil to my page, obviously because I'm adding the rainbow. I did consider painting the pattern on the base blue, but I really liked how it looked plain, and as I said, I'd spent so long on this at this point, I thought no, I'm leaving it plain. I really liked how it looks. So I am using a ton of tacky glue to stick down this rainbow in the corner. I did do a guide of where I wanted it to go, so when I added the clouds, I didn't add anywhere that I didn't add any in a place that would be covered up. I left this page for quite a while with some heavy things on it just to ensure that that rainbow got stuck down, and then I added my quote, and it says, "Joy will reveal itself after sorrow." And although it is a little bit hard to see with the sewing pattern in the background, in person you can see it quite easily. So yeah, that's this mammoth page finished. Hi guys, so I'm just editing this video, about to upload it, and I thought the sound was a little bit off. I've accidentally used the microphone that comes on my laptop instead of my usual microphone, and I don't have time to re-record that voiceover that I did, so I hope it's not too off-putting. It'll be back to normal in the next video. I hope you enjoyed this video. Bye guys!